Whose side are you on? After all this cheating? They demanded. After Dad's digital betrayals and Mom's drunken revenge. I just looked at them. Silent. They expected me to choose. The shock on their faces when I finally walked away, choosing only myself, was a moment that still burns. Now I'm seeking answers. Growing up, our family looked pretty normal from the outside. My parents, Mom and Dad, they had their spats like anyone else. But nothing ever felt wrong in a big fundamental way. Or maybe I just didn't see it. In hindsight, there was always this low hum of tension. Like a fridge buzzing in the background, you don't notice it until it suddenly stops. And then the silence is deafening. The first time I really got a whiff that something was off with Dad, I must have been in high school. He was always glued to his computer, which wasn't unusual for him. But I remember walking by his office one evening and catching a glimpse of his screen. It was a chat window, and the words scrolled by too fast for me to really read. But there was a tone to the messages, an intimacy that felt off. It wasn't just a casual conversation. My stomach tightened. I didn't say anything. Just kept walking. But the image stuck with me. What was that? My brain immediately tried to rationalize it away, maybe a work thing? Or just goofy friends. But a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Over the years, those glimpses became more frequent. And less deniable. I'd hear hushed arguments from Mom's side of the closed bedroom door. Her voice getting sharper. Dad's responses often defensive or dismissive. It's nothing. You're overreacting. He'd say. Or, I already told you. I'll stop. Mom would lay down ultimatums. Often after finding some digital breadcrumbs, a deleted browser history that still showed residual data. A strange email address. A notification on his phone that flashed across the screen too quickly. I'd see her face. Red and drawn. The next morning. My goal then was just to understand why there was always this underlying fight. This simmering anger. I wanted to believe everything was fine. That these were just minor bumps. The full picture, the truly ugly one, didn't come all at once. It was a slow drip of terrible revelations. I pieced it together from fragments: Mom's devastated whispers to her sister on the phone. A forgotten laptop left open revealing multiple profiles on hookup sites. A casual comment from a relative about Dad's internet hobbies. The worst was discovering he was sending and receiving nudes. Not just from strangers, but from people he'd met online. Even after Mom had caught him multiple times and begged him to stop. And then, the absolute gut punch: he had taken naked pictures of Mom without her knowledge or consent, and was sending them to these people. That revelation hit me like a physical blow. My own mother. My dad was doing this. I locked myself in my room that night. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what kind of person would do that. This wasn't just chatting. This was a deliberate, continuous pattern of deceit and betrayal, violating privacy and trust in the most intimate ways. I wanted to confront him, to scream. But what would that even achieve? Just another fight. My dilemma was paralyzing. If I spoke up, it would just add fuel to an already raging fire. If I stayed silent, I felt like an accomplice to this terrible secret, watching my mom slowly unravel. Mom's frustration reached a boiling point after years of these betrayals. Every promise Dad made was broken. Every ultimatum ignored. It was a cycle of digital infidelity, confrontation, and denial. She was exhausted. And frankly, I was too. Just from witnessing it. So, 4 years. This was the landscape of our family life. A quiet erosion of trust, fueled by Dad's digital deceptions, and Mom's escalating, futile attempts to stop it. It became clear that his actions weren't just mistakes. They were a pervasive, hidden life. Have any of you ever been in a similar situation? Where one parent's hidden life slowly destroyed the family from the inside out? How did you even begin to process the betrayal when it was so extensive and long-standing? After years of Dad's digital betrayals and Mom's increasingly desperate ultimatums, the air in our house was always heavy, thick with unspoken resentment. It was like waiting for a storm to hit, knowing it was coming, but having no idea just how violent it would be. One evening, after what seemed like another quiet dinner, Mom went into Dad's study. The door clicked shut, then opened a moment later. No raised voices. No immediate shouting. Just a silence that felt heavier than usual. I heard her footsteps, slow and deliberate, walk past my door and into the kitchen. The clink of ice. Then the distinctive gurgle of a bottle being poured. I knew. I just knew that she had found him again. My brain tried to put the pieces together. What did she see this time? Was it another chat? More pictures? A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. Not slammed, but with a deliberate, resolute click. I peeked out my window just in time to see Mom's car pull out of the driveway. Tires kicking up a puff of gravel. Her face, even from that distance, looked utterly blank, devoid of any emotion I could recognize. Where is she going? And why is she leaving Dad alone after this? I thought. My goal in that moment was to simply understand the pattern. Dad messes up. Mom gets mad. They fight. Rinse. Repeat. But this felt different. This was not a fight. This was a retreat. She didn't come home that night. Dad was quiet. Unusually so. He stayed in his study, the light on until the early hours. The next morning, the house was a tomb. I walked into the kitchen to find Mom sitting at the table, nursing a cup of coffee, her eyes red-rimmed but strangely defiant. Dad walked in, his face tight. There was no greeting, no small talk. I slept with someone last night, Mom said, her voice flat, devoid of any inflection. She didn't look at Dad, instead focusing on the steam rising from her mug. Dad stopped dead in his tracks. The coffee mug he was reaching for clattered back onto the counter. What did you just say? His voice was a low growl. You heard me, she replied, finally meeting his gaze. A flicker of something raw and unbridled in her eyes. I met a man at the bar. We went back to his place. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating. Dad's face went from pale to a mottled red. He didn't speak for a full minute. Just stood there, breathing heavily. When he finally did, his voice was barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. You actually did that. Then, the dam broke. The living room became a war zone of words. Slamming doors. Shouted accusations. The metallic clang of something being thrown. I think it was a photo frame. I stayed locked in my room. But the sound traveled through the thin walls. Mom was screaming about years of humiliation. About all the ultimatums ignored. About how he had broken her, piece by piece. Dad, in turn, was yelling about betrayal. About her stooping to his level. About how this was different. My brain was trying to process this new layer of chaos. Mom had crossed a line. A physical one. After all those years of Dad's digital infidelity. All his broken promises. She had finally retaliated. My goal immediately shifted. Does this make her just as bad? Does it erase years of Dad's behavior? My dilemma was sharp and painful. I'd spent years feeling sick about Dad's actions. Seeing Mom as the one constantly hurt. Now, she had done something undeniably wrong too. Even if it felt like an extreme, desperate reaction to years of abuse. I felt a confusing mix of understanding her pain and being shocked by her choice. That morning, listening to the destruction, I realized that whatever marriage my parents had, it was completely and utterly gone. The line between victim and perpetrator had just blurred into an unrecognizable mess. It's hard to wrap my head around. When someone is pushed to their absolute breaking point after years of psychological torture, and they finally lash out in a way that's technically wrong, does that action somehow invalidate all the suffering they endured leading up to it? Or is it simply another unfortunate casualty of a deeply toxic situation? After Mom's bombshell and the absolute nuclear explosion that followed, our house became a hostile territory. The yelling tapered off eventually, replaced by a chilling silence, punctuated only by the clatter of hastily packed bags and the slamming of doors. Divorce papers were filed almost immediately, and it felt less like a legal process and more like two wounded animals tearing each other apart, using legal documents as claws. My parents, the people who were supposed to be my safe harbor, were now just two bitter strangers sharing a last name. I spent weeks just replaying everything in my head. Dad's words. You actually did that. His disbelief. His anger, it was all so raw. Then Mom's flat confession. The defiant look in her eyes. My brain just kept churning, trying to reconcile the image of my parents from my childhood with these ugly, broken people. My dad, who used to joke around, now just looked perpetually aggrieved. My mom, who was always so composed, now had this hollow look, tinged with a furious resentment. My goal now was to find some kind of peace for myself. To figure out how to navigate this wreckage without letting it completely define my future or ruin my relationships with either of them. I kept going back to Dad's actions, the online chatting, the nudes, the hookup profiles, watching porn excessively, and especially sending Mom's pictures. It was years of this, a consistent pattern of violating trust and privacy. I remember him always being on his phone, always a little distant. Even when he was physically present, he was addicted to something, whether it was the thrill of the chase, the validation from strangers, or just escaping reality through porn. He probably just needed professional help with his addiction. I kept thinking, it's not an excuse for what he did. Not at all. But it offers a sliver of explanation for the compulsive, repeated nature of his betrayals. It allowed me to see him not just as a monster, but as someone deeply flawed, perhaps unwell, who caused immense pain. But then Mom's one-night stand would flash into my mind. Her getting drunk, going to the bar, and then deliberately telling Dad the next day. It was an act of pure, raw, retaliatory rage. Was it justified? That's the word that keeps spinning in my head. After years of emotional torture, did she earn the right to lash out? Or did her crossing that physical line make her just as wrong as Dad? Even if his actions were digital, I'm stuck trying to balance the scales. One caused years of psychological damage through a hidden, pervasive pattern of betrayal. The other reacted explosively after hitting rock bottom. The dilemma for me is that I don't want to side with either. But I can't help but measure their actions, weigh their hurt, and try to find a fair conclusion. But there's nothing fair about this. The emotional toll on me is huge. It's like my whole family history. Everything I thought I knew has been rewritten in Sharpie. I grieve for the family I thought I had, for the parents I believed them to be. I'm confused, angry, and exhausted. I'm trying to set boundaries for myself, trying to protect my own mental health through all this mess. But it's hard when the people who raised you are now at war. I can see the flaws in both of them so clearly now. And it's unsettling. How do you respect people who have hurt each other so deeply? And in turn, hurt you by proxy? How do you move forward with your own life when the very foundation it was built on is crumbling? Honestly, Reddit, I'm lost. I'm trying so hard not to take sides, to not fall into the trap of blaming one over the other entirely. But I can't help but wonder, given everything I've laid out, are my mother's actions justified as a reaction to years of his profound betrayal? Or is my dad ultimately the victim of her physical infidelity, even after everything he did? Any perspective, any advice on how to navigate this emotional minefield without losing myself would be massively appreciated. Thanks for listening.